Hi, welcome back to the Talent Time Machine, the podcast that takes you on a journey through time to imagine our world of work in 2050. I'm Marissa, your host, and in today's episode, we have a special guest, Michael Henderson. Michael is a renowned corporate anthropologist with over 25 years' experience observing, advising, and educating organizations on how to enhance their workplace culture. In this episode, titled Exit the Expert, Enter the Empath, we'll be interrogating a future we can already glimpse today, a place where AI and quantum computing have reduced our need to retain knowledge and earn our living as experts. So what will the role of a human be? Will empathy, creativity, and resilience replace expertise? How will we train and educate a new generation of leaders and workers who are in touch and in tune with the needs of the 2050 work population? Join us as we explore these questions and more with Michael Henderson. Today, I would like to welcome Michael to the podcast. He is a corporate anthropologist with over 25 years of experience and a really varied background, different geographies, different industries. So welcome, Michael. And if you wouldn't mind, take a few minutes to introduce yourself. And also, how did you get into corporate anthropology? What is corporate anthropology?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. Corporate anthropology is a applied aspect of the study of anthropology. So if you probably come across the term anthropology, which is has many different ways of being described, but the way I typically describe it in my world with the clients I work with is that anthropology is the study of human beings as curators of culture. So using culture as the particular lens that we look at human beings through to see how various cultures are different from one another or the same, or how cultures enable themselves to function over very long periods of time, where other aspects of human society like governments or kingdoms or religions even don't necessarily survive that long, and vice versa, where certain tribes or cultures cease to exist as well. And then corporate anthropology is really just taking some of the skill sets from anthropology, which is learning to participate and observe in a culture, to be able to document it, understand it, teach about it sometimes, and also sometimes help the culture itself navigate in a wider world that maybe it's not that familiar with. So it could be that you are helping a group of people that need to communicate something to government or to trade partners or to another culture where they want to connect or communicate or share or trade, helping them just understand the differences between the two and how certain things work in one area and don't work in the other. So when you apply that in the business world, a major piece of what I end up doing is actually educating businesses on what culture actually is. So where does it come from? How does it form? Who leads it? Who owns it? Why does it sometimes change when you don't want it to? And sometimes it doesn't change when you do want it to, despite your best change initiative. Why do most merger and acquisitions fail or underperform because of culture more than any other factor? So it's really just helping businesses understand they usually have a culture, so of actually explaining to them what that is and how it functions. And perhaps the most important thing that clients seem to be really grateful for suddenly realizing is what culture actually delivers, what's its output. And the primary one in terms of a business or an organization is performance. So that's what corporate anthropology is, and just work with organizations around the world that are genuinely, nearly everyone says they are, but then you find out they're often not as genuine, but genuinely see that culture's got a role to play in the business for them to grow or succeed or survive, or sometimes even just reposition themselves in the marketplace if they need to be seen as a employer of opportunity and equality, for example, or a company that's genuinely taking sustainability seriously, and sometimes the culture doesn't have that reputation. So they might invite us in to support them on that journey.
Got it. So if I had to sum up in a different way, I guess a harsher way, people care about culture because culture drives performance, which drives the financial performance. And if you don't have a good hardwiring of that culture, you're going to get something you don't expect or don't want.
Yeah.
Is that fair? Kind of at the simplest?
Yeah, in a very commercial sort of mindset, that's absolutely fair. And then in a more social perspective of it, then just with hybrid working, people working from home and the Great Resignation. And I think organizations have also almost been caught out a little bit and suddenly realized that these employees that they have actually have some power and influence now and some choice now, which maybe for decades has either been taken for granted or ignored even by sort of organizations. And suddenly they're suddenly going, oh, can they do that? Can they choose to work from home rather than? And so they're having to kind of realign themselves and re-understand the nature of what it means to be human in a workplace in order to make sure that they're doing everything they can to support human beings to have a great working experience. And that's working experience together. So human beings working together. So to be able to look after them from mental health and diversity and inclusion, all that great stuff. And at the same time, serve the business. And at the same time, support the brand. So the brand's sort of promises or positioning in the marketplace or in the community around things like sustainability or contribution back into society. So it's some sort of multifaceted.
That's something we talk about in talent attraction all the time too. It's sort of your brand promise doesn't pay off if your website looks great. You have all these sustainability, inclusivity. We're an employer that promotes diversity. And if every person you talk to is a white male who's 45 years old and all the language is in American English and is paced in a way that somebody who's a non-native speaker can not understand or keep up with, the brand promise is not paid off. So I that authenticity that comes through, I guess, is really the culture showing up, right? Your culture will show up, like you said, one way or the other, whether it's what you want it to be or not. Yeah,
that's a lovely way you've just described it. So if I just pick up on the phrase you used there around the brand promise, the distinction I would make is that the brand is a combination of your business's positioning and messaging into the marketplace, coupled with the market's response and interpretation of that message. So I often think organizations think they own the brand. And even in my own practice, I've learned the brand actually belongs to my customers, not to me. I see brand as the delivery of a promise to the marketplace. We're corporate anthropologists and we will do this for you. And then I see culture as the making and keeping or breaking of that promise.
Interesting. So it's not neutral. It either supports it or it breaks it. It always has an impact in an interaction.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Right.
And I do think we've seen a rise in expectation for both companies and individuals in companies of widening what at work means in terms of how you show up, what you can bring to work, what you can't. This whole line of delineation between work and self feels to be blurred. And we've definitely seen that employers want people to come into the office and employees want an office to come into, but don't want to be told they have to come into the office. So I guess if you had to say, in the last 3 to 5 years, what has changed so rapidly that, of course, we're getting a little cultural whiplash of it because it's just such a rapid revolution?
The biggest thing I've seen shift is I think there's been a bit of awakening around personal values. And what I mean by that is, what are the key priorities that you as an individual human being organize your life around? What are the core principles or the core concepts that you hold dear or as most important to you? And let's say, I'm just going to give you some random ones, but let's say you had sort of 5 that were the top ones, and it was things like family, health, growth, learning, and nature. What you may have found is 3 or 4 years ago that you had those, but they actually took a bit of a backseat because you spent most of your time earning money or participating in your career or growing your professional ability as you worked your way through various levels of an organization. Once you end up with time at home because of COVID, for example, some of that time that you wouldn't normally have to engage with those other values suddenly becomes available to you. Because if you just take just the commuting time alone, I was just talking with somebody yesterday who used to do 6 hours a day commuting.
We have offices in city centers that was very much 6 hours a day. 4 to 6 hours a day, reliably.
So if you take that individual, they're suddenly sitting at home where they've now got 6 hours of their life back, which is not restricted to what's possibly can be done on a bus or a train anymore. They're now actually able to go for a walk in nature. They're actually able to spend time with the kids. They're actually able to pick up on that hobby or do the extra curriculum study, right? And so suddenly you get enriched through these other values that you didn't have access to before. You had them as concepts, but you couldn't actually bring them to life. So in summary, what I think has really happened, and I've noticed this a lot, and I've been sort of predicting this coming for quite some time. I've written a couple of books on it, just saying, a bit of a heads up, this is probably coming at some stage, and it seems to have arrived, although I had no idea when it's going to happen. I think there's been a shift from, there used to be an emphasis on organizational values, when the company had a set of values like integrity and customer service and respect. And they were in the foyer.
Right off the wall.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. They're on the wall, and we used to have to nod and bow down to them every morning, and it was sort of included in the annual engagement survey, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think what happened with the emphasis on that is that people kind of gave themselves permission to ignore their own personal values to a certain extent. You can't ignore them because they're impossible to ignore. But I think the emphasis became on this collective focus on the company values. And then with COVID hitting, I think what happened was we suddenly are not in the same physical environment where we do read those values or on the screensavers or the coffee mug or the baseball cap. The values certainly aren't there. And I think what's happened is people have just found a richness in their own personal values being expressed above and beyond what the professional satisfaction or camaraderie that was on offer from the company values. So the bottom line there is that personal values always override the organizational values unless you are the founder of the business, in which case, unless you have actually almost brought your own personal values into existence
with a company.
Yeah,
got it.
Yeah, and
right.
There's some hugely successful, famous USA companies that have, the founders are famous around the world, and you can see where that's happened. It's their personal values that have become the company values. But for most of us employees, that never happens.
We're seeing that come in where people, especially Gen Z, coming into the workplace are saying, I'd like work to fit with my life, not living to work. Work has never looked like this. I mean, prior to Industrial Revolution, people leaving their homes to go work not being a family business, work being this thing that exists outside of your personal identity, actually a really relatively new phenomenon. So it's I guess the sorting of where it will land, where we really skewed from everyone, if you think back hundreds of years, you did the trade of your parents, you did the trade of your family, you were named after the trade you were in, all the way into I left home and I couldn't tell people I had, when I started working, the advice I got was, if you have to leave work to go to a doctor's appointment for your child, don't say it because people want you, they don't want your personality coming into work. Say that you have an appointment. So it's like that pendulum went all the way that we had to pretend we weren't even humans. Where do you think it's going to land, that back and forth? Because we're bringing work into the home, we're bringing home into the work. Where does that land?
I suspect that it will open up a pathway for us to experience our humanity at a level that maybe we've deprived ourselves of before. And the reason I say that is I've traveled extensively because of my kind of work as an anthropologist. You get out and see cultures all around the world. And I've repeatedly been amazed at some of the more isolated communities of human beings living on a planet that maybe are slightly disconnected from a very industrialized, technological, advanced, and I don't mean advanced in any superior way, but they've just sort of gone off in a particular direction. You go and spend time with these communities, and then suddenly what you realize is that in many ways they're more human. That they're actually experiencing the experience of being a human being in a village or in a community with a lot more human emotions on display. Like you just said, we don't have to pretend. We don't have to cover up. We don't have to camouflage ourselves. We can just be us and be us in a very, very raw, authentic, open manner. And so I wonder whether the opportunity that we've just afforded ourselves, or many of us have been able to afford ourselves, to be able to start to work from home and kind of have a little bit more of an integrated life, whether that's actually what's going to happen is that we're going to access different parts of our personality, or maybe if you're that way inclined, different parts of our spirituality, that suddenly you just go, oh, I didn't I didn't realize I had a sense of humor, because I can't use my sense of humor in the law firm. That's frowned upon. But sitting around here in the common shared workplace with there's a lot of humor. And not that I'm a comedian, but I can sense that that's funny. I can sense that that's worth laughing about. So I suddenly discover I've got a sense of humor, which I've always had, of course, but I've never allowed it to emerge during my workday. And suddenly it starts to emerge. And then I suddenly find, well, I'm happier. I'm engaging more effectively with other people. My health and well-being is improved through laughter. Well, they always say laughter is the best medicine. And so I think there's elements of that we're even seeing the early signs of that starting to emerge now as people are reorientating themselves within themselves. And I see that as a potentially hugely beneficial thing.
And so if I take that forward into the future and think about, well, I guess I'll look back for a second. You think about that very separate idea of person and work, my humanness and my workness, where never the twain shall meet. And the type of leadership that excelled in that environment were these personas of their own making, the Jack Welch, the heavy-handed. Doesn't seem like that's going to be the right persona to inspire and lead in future. So if we're fast forwarding to 2050 and we have people that are more integrated, they have an integrated life and humanity at work, what are the most important characteristics of leadership or team members that flourish that might have not shown up in, say, the 60s, 70s, and 80s?
Yeah, that's a really vital question. I think the recent history of leadership in organizations has almost pragmatically been about control. It's control the resources, control the time frame, control the systems, control the process, control who you recruit, control who you promote, control, right? The whole thing's been a control game. And I think what's happening, especially with the advance and recent arrival of things like AI and chatbots, and so this suddenly become artificial intelligence has suddenly moved from this almost science fiction concept that people that know about that thing are playing with over there in that hidden room, has suddenly, because it's been brought into general population, has suddenly been accessible. So straight away, that unleashes a secondary component that I think leadership now has to factor in, which is what I call develop. Oh, now we've got this available to us. What could we develop with that? What could we use that for? Where could that take us that we haven't been before? And I think just within my network, just over the last 100 days of people accessing that, immediately people's productivity has gone through the roof. So you can suddenly ask artificial intelligence to do a lot of work that suddenly again frees up more of your time. So there's this time factor. So we've got from control as a concept for leading into integrating and maybe even accelerating develop, which is how do we develop ourselves and use this incredible resource that's available to us? And also, where does that development take us? So I think there's a leadership framework at the moment that is rapidly trying to sprint almost to understand what that means. How do you work with that? And obviously, how do you lead that? Yeah, it basically means we're in between, right? So we haven't let go of the past yet. We haven't arrived at the future yet. It's like an adolescence, right? We're somewhere in between and it's a bit messy. So I think that's where we are at the moment.
If you think about anthropology, then I guess for the first time, maybe I'm wrong. I'm not an anthropologist. You correct me here if I'm misled. But there's another entity in anthropology that will create feelings, that will create sentiment. That's the AI sitting as a digital worker in the workforce. And leaders of the future have to create culture knowing that there's this other entity. It's not a human, but could create culture on the way that you are expected to interact with it. How, as a leader, are you creating culture around that? What do you need to know?
So I think at the moment, the best thing leaders can do is almost just become a bit of a social scientist for 90 days in the workplace, and just walk around and ask people, how are you using it? What's working? What's not working? Where do you see there's opportunities for us? And where are you alarmed or concerned about what this could mean for us? Because it's so new that none of us have the answer. Even artificial intelligence, if you ask it, doesn't have the answer where we're headed with this thing.
It says that, right?
Yeah, right. So, yeah. And to your point, this is where it gets really, really interesting. You go, hang on a minute, this is supposedly a neutral algorithm sitting behind all this, and yet it's got an opinion.
We've been talking about a lot with the pandemic, sending people home, people working from home. We're almost creating like a two-class system because there's a whole part of the workforce that never went home. People that have to manufacture. And if you are someone who is in the cleaning business, you never went home and your job actually looks largely the same as it has for centuries before. You clean, you go in at a schedule. And so we talk about the white collar, kind of the overclass being able to go home, rediscover their humanity. In terms of creating an inclusive culture, because you just said, why don't you go walk around and ask everyone?
Yeah.
Where am I walking to? And how does this work if you've got half of the population almost on a rocket ship of innovation and assistance, and the others might be feeling a little left behind?
You're right. And all I'm suggesting is that each and every one of those environments can be visited and explored in the manner I've just sort of described, but
Yes.
on the understanding, to your point, that you need to be aware straight away, as you correctly pointed out, you're going to get a very, very different response from somebody that's got a mop in their hands than you are with somebody that's got a laser, a laser beam in their hands. So I still think there's merit in that. So even with things like cleaning or driving a forklift, there's opportunities with artificial intelligence to apply artificial intelligence to that situation. So understanding what are the leading practices around health and safety of driving a forklift in a warehouse. Just getting that information, never going over 5 miles per hour, right, reduces accidents by 95%. Who'd have thought? We should reduce our 7 mile per hour limit down to 5.
How do we get people to feel like this is a time of opportunity, excitement versus something to be feared?
I think that one of the best things you can do is ask questions of each other. So literally sort of as a leader saying, okay, so this whole artificial intelligence being available is new. It's been, 110 days now. How are you all feeling? Right? What's it bringing up for you? What's it bringing to mind? So I think asking, just genuine inquiry into the experience is important. And this kind of gets me to a point that I think there's a massive shift occurring that I'm not, certainly in my network, I'm not sure how many leaders are paying attention to, is there's been a subtle sort of shift going on beneath the surface of all the things that are impacting around the world at the moment, from what I call objective reality, which is the new shiny things arrived, or this thing's happening in the environment. So it's all this kind of impactful stuff that's happening out there, that they even caught that phrase around VUCA, didn't they? Around volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. There's been a shift into the subjective, which is how you're processing that on the inside of you. So what is the emotional, psychological reaction or responses you're having to this change that's going on, or this new incident or this new circumstance? So I think that's a really rich area for leaders to start to consider and build skill sets in. And it will require some skill sets to learn how to provide a leveling of inquiry, which even the inquiry itself is inviting and safe to respond to. If I was inside your body, mind, emotions, and brain right now with this going on, what would my experience be?
That's a really good way to open the question, to then saying, how are you doing? Or do you feel okay? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And the reason for that, of course, is we're all completely unique subjective experiences of life.
That's
And
true.
a lot of what business is about, and it's worked brilliantly, is categorizing. Right. So we categorize product, we categorize price, we categorize customers, we categorize markets. And of course, we categorize our people. We say that group of people over there, they're the IT team, and there's the HR group, and these guys are the marketing team. So what I'm realizing is a lot of leaders, maybe even have decades of experience leading, have never, ever, ever been in a situation where they have to actually stop and go, so Marissa, this artificial intelligence things that's just come in, if I was living inside you, right, with the emotions, the history, the belief systems, the psychology, heck, even the biology, what's this doing for you? What's it like being on the inside of you with this artificial intelligence thing arriving?
That leads me to some questions. If we're in this time, we're moving from control to develop in this liminal moment where people really need to be more human. if I have a 20-year-old son, I have a 12-year-old son, and also a 10 and 8-year-old son. So lots of them in a variety of moments coming into the workplace.
Right.
What should I be telling them if they're just getting ready to be an active member of society? What are some good things they should be learning, seeking out, talking about, experiencing now to get them ready for 2050?
I think the first thing I would say, which kind of loops back to one of our earlier points in our discussion together here, is I'd be absolutely encouraging them to understand and explore their own personal values.
That's really fascinating. So look inside.
Absolutely.
I was expecting you to go out to the world, but you're saying know yourself before you do anything.
There's a massive possibility emerging with automation of work, even manual labor, being sort of supported by robots or automation, etc. There's a massive possibility with this freeing up of time for us to have those more intimate sort of conversations and more intimate connections with ourselves and the world. There's an opportunity to really unpack the subjective experience of being human. In other words, to really start to understand, what does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to be consciously aware of being alive? We're one of the few species that has that capacity to actually be aware we are alive. So I think this is a really rich opportunity that some of the great traditions have been talking about, in some cases for thousands of years, saying there's something going on inside you that in order to understand and tap into and access and benefit from, you are going to have to surrender some of your addiction to what's outside of you.
Interesting. So like the self-actualization, the whole controlling mind, body, spirit alignment is not going to happen if we're just running after work, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
So our work will become becoming.
There's elements of being human that are sitting latent there, that because we get busy or invested or distracted or seduced or addicted, right? So the moment some of those are simplified or reduced or even replaced, and you suddenly now have a little bit more of, to that point you said earlier, about you can put your attention somewhere that you haven't been able to really invest somewhere else before. I just think the innate experience of being human is such a rich universe in itself that most of us just have never had the opportunity to dedicate some time to investigate, explore, unpack, and emerge from that. And I just think that is the potential rich future. So I'm even talking to my clients at the moment, is sort of saying, you've got to stop thinking about the workplace as a place of work. You've got to start thinking about it as a learning a living, not earning a living. Because of the development element that I talked about, we've now got to think about, we're running a learning environment that happens as a byproduct to produce shoes, right? And market them and get revenue from that. But we're here to learn about shoes. We're here to learn about the future of shoes. We're here to learn about the shifting symbolism of shoes. Because shoes have become avatars, right? They're not just something you put on your feet and walk somewhere. Some of them are being traded as pieces of art now.
Right. Or I regularly get bills from my children buying fake clothes for fake people in a universe that doesn't exist.
Yeah, right.
To the fact that, when it first happens, you're like, no, I am not. And now that's where they spend money, is this universe. They're buying outfits for fictional characters. And we thought this was like, this is bananas. No one's going to use this other universe. But that's where they have their identity. Right. So their identity is on fictional characters they created for themselves. Now, they also have their own identity, but they've created 2 and 3 other versions of themselves that they regularly want to invest in. They will do chores for. And that is something that is just, when I think about it, okay, at work, how does that show up? Or in life, how does that show up? Are you your avatar? Are you yourself?
Right.
And I think, just going back to your point of looking inward versus looking outward, it's very interesting that humans as social creatures often do look outwards for happiness, contentment, satisfaction. And to most, that whole why you perform at work is because you want the praise, you want the recognition, you need the sustenance, and you need the revenue to be able to, afford your lifestyle. But at the end of the day, when you think about people at the end of their life, they're not saying, well, I'm glad I put that extra 25 hours in per week. They're talking about the vacations they want, and they're talking about the moments they had. They're talking about births and weddings and funerals. And that is, I guess, actually a really good rebalancing of, if you step back and look at your life as an equation, you put 80% of your time in a place that probably gives you 20% of your identity and rob the rest of your life. And so that is not going to sustain, or it shouldn't sustain once you pick your head up. And it is about picking your head up. Just like you said, we're evolving as a species to get more aware of who we are and what we're doing and why we're doing. And that will help us evolve. Just interesting.
And I think that I love that answer. Thank you for sharing that, because I was just reflecting on the opening kind of context you provided for us talking about this, which was when you referenced your children at the various ages and said, what do you think they should be paying attention to? So I think that, again, comes back to that personal values inquiry. I think is really, really important that all individuals now start to just question, who am I? And values are a lovely access point for that, because answering who am I can be a lifetime journey and
a changing one, right?
Absolutely. And an intangible one, right? You have to have a subjective experience of that to actually know the answer. So it's not an intellectual pursuit. It's a subjective experience where you suddenly have a moment where you suddenly go, oh, there it is. And then someone says, what was that? And you go, right? So you will not be able to articulate. If it's the real deal, you will not be able to describe it to someone else, because you can't. It's not a vocabulary-based experience. So I think the start of the journey is giving people a vocabulary-based experience, like your children, just letting them sort through a values list and kind of go, what lights you up? What makes your day? What makes you feel alive? Where do you find the greatest version of you? And just learning to understand that, and then kind of going, great, so does that show up when you do ballet? Does that show up when you study maths? Does that show up when you spend time with family? Does that show up when we go as a family for a picnic, right? Or a walk in the park? So it's just learning, or helping them learn to identify themselves, how they orientate in different locations through something that is consistent. So the values will be consistent, but the locations will obviously be constantly changing and adapting. And I think that's also a really, really good hack for the hybrid work situation, is working from home. If you're doing a little bit at work and working from home, or traveling. Again, I'd really encourage people just to kind of go, forget the locations, the two separate locations to start with.
You're just working.
Yeah.
You're just working.
And then figure out, what does the word concept of work mean to me? What are the values I associate with that experience? Learning, growth, challenge, collaboration, creativity. So great. Now, if you've got those, it's not even just restricted to work, right? You can play a game of Monopoly and have those values present, right?
Yes. I think that's really good advice. That's really practical and tangible to say, start with your own personal values. And as a parent, that's a good hack of being to be able to create the language to help guide your child is a huge thing in the world of work or otherwise. And to help them know each other, it seems so much more inclusive than, are you an introvert? Are you an extrovert? That actually doesn't, it's more, who are you? And then how does it show up in the things you do? Thank you so much for all your wise advice and walking us through what's happening. I really like the idea of that we're in this liminal moment, that we're between worlds, and that we're changing, and that the future of work is really going to be about becoming more human and understanding our own experiences and connecting at a human level. And really great advice about moving the culture forward by investing in knowing yourself. And if you had devised the future of talent, it's to know what you value, and that's the constant, and know that it shows up differently in different places, and that's okay. And that this will be a journey, an ongoing journey that is not, like how you said, not a vocabulary-based journey, a very personal journey that you'll go on, but that's how you're going to connect to whatever work looks like in the future. So thank you very much. It's been a great and engaging conversation. I appreciate your time. It was great to get to know you, Michael.
Well, thank you, Marissa, and thank you for your succinct summary. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Take care. Thanks for the early wake up. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Wow, what a great discussion. Thank you to our guest, Michael Henderson, for sharing his invaluable insights with us. It's been a fascinating discussion, and we hope you, our listeners, have gained some valuable insights into what the future of work might look like and how it can impact work cultures. Even with the rise of technology and AI, I'm pleased to hear that good old human values like empathy and creativity are still an absolute necessity. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic, so please feel free to share your views with us on social media channels or through our website. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to stay up to date with the latest episodes. Join us next time as we continue our journey through time with the Talent Time Machine. Thanks for listening.